Among the legacies of the 9/11 attacks are counterterrorism stings, the FBI's tool of choice to identify and stop would-be terrorists. But instead of nabbing dangerous terrorists, these aggressive stings appear to entrap financially broke, mentally ill, or otherwise hapless individuals. Still, the use of these stings has only expanded over the last 2 decades.
More arrests of ISIS sympathizers here in the United States. The FBI nabbed at least 6 people in Minneapolis and San Diego.
The man accused of trying to bomb the Federal Reserve Building in New York also considered targeting President Obama.
These 2 Zion residents tonight claim that government agents made them do it. They say entrapping them in schemes dreamt up by the FBI.
So let's go back to how all this started. After al-Qaeda operatives hijacked commercial airplanes on September 11, 2001, the FBI was the frontline agency, put in charge of stopping the next attack.
Global terrorism and the FBI's response to what happened on that day is something that I and almost everyone in the Bureau thinks about for a good part, a better part of every day.
The FBI first built an unprecedented spy network in Muslim communities nationwide, recruiting more than 15,000 informants. And to find would-be terrorists, the FBI deployed what was, not so long ago, a very controversial tactic: undercover stings. FBI stings weren't new in the post-9/11 era. Back in the 1980s, for example, the FBI targeted the brash auto executive John DeLorean in a sting. The FBI recorded DeLorean agreeing to bankroll a cocaine smuggling operation as a way to save his ailing car company. The jury in DeLorean's criminal case agreed with some of the early criticism of stings. He was acquitted at trial after arguing that he was illegally entrapped by federal agents. Stings nevertheless continued and became a key weapon for federal agents during the so-called war on drugs. They were so common that they've become part of our popular culture.
Miami Vice, you're under arrest. Turn around and put your hands on the bar.
So after 9/11, the FBI realized that if agents could use stings to find drug dealers, why couldn't they use them to find terrorists?
1-1, test.
The earliest of these counterterrorism stings involved informants, posing as some sort of terrorist operative, offering the means and opportunity for would-be terrorists to move forward with otherwise implausible plots. An example of this involves 7 poor black men in Miami. They became known as the Liberty City 7. An FBI informant told the men he was an al-Qaeda operative. But the evidence in the case strongly suggested that the Liberty City 7 weren't plotting a terrorist attack, but running a scam. The FBI informant offered them $25,000, and they appeared willing to say just about anything to get the money. During the sting, the Liberty City 7's leader spoke of bombing the FBI office in Miami and the Sears Tower in Chicago. It was all talk, because the group didn't have money or weapons. But the FBI built a case by asking the Liberty City 7 to give a pledge of allegiance to al-Qaeda, which resulted in this ridiculous bit of FBI theater.
You will repeat after me. God's pledge, is upon me. And so is his compact.
The Liberty City 7 case was so problematic that it took prosecutors 3 trials to convict 5 of the 7 men on terrorism charges. That could have dissuaded the FBI and the Justice Department from these kinds of cases, but it didn't. Instead of abandoning terrorism stings as a tactic, the FBI refined the tactic, introducing more and more actual weapons into the supposed plots, everything from guns to car bombs to surface-to-air missiles. The FBI has run counterterrorism stings nationwide. My colleague Margot Williams and I have been tracking these stings for years. As of the 20th anniversary of 9/11, about 350 defendants have been prosecuted on international terrorism charges following FBI stings. The vast majority of these defendants didn't have the money or weapons needed to commit acts of terrorism. The FBI provided everything. Most of these stings involve the use of an informant, someone either paid to work for the FBI or doing so for leniency on criminal charges. In other words, these informants had direct incentives to find supposed terrorists. The vast majority of these defendants also never had connections to terrorists overseas. The only terrorists most of these people knew were pretend ones, specifically FBI operatives. But the courts have rewarded the FBI and the Justice Department with a near-perfect conviction record in these cases. One reason for that is that the FBI makes the plots look real, coaching targets through jihadi videos.
If you are a Muslim, stand up for Allah and our people. Fight for Him and fight to create a caliphate worldwide.
And then providing them with bombs that seem pretty scary.
This is what we're going to test. I just call it a Christmas tree. When it's for real, we're going to take this off and we're going to put 2 other wires in. Oh, okay. It's real simple. All right. Right now, we're just going to fucking test it. I'll go over the whole thing with you.
The FBI claims these stings get potentially dangerous people off of America's streets before real terrorists can enable their violent ideations. But data about these cases doesn't support that claim. That's because of the approximately 350 people who've been prosecuted and imprisoned following FBI terrorism stings, about half have been released, meaning they're back on the streets, available for any of these supposedly real terrorists to recruit. In reality, FBI stings create terrorism plots that federal agents can then foil, and government officials can claim to Congress and the public that they've thwarted terrorism.
We have also seen individuals, including American citizens, apparently inspired by al-Qaeda's ideology, take matters into their own hands. Again, we have disrupted a number of these plots, including individuals in Texas and Illinois charged with planning to blow up buildings.
Since FBI terrorism stings almost exclusively target Muslims, the resulting arrests over 2 decades have exaggerated the perceived threat of terrorism from Muslims in the United States. That helped create a false narrative.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
But the effectiveness of these stings in preventing real terrorism is questionable. Before Omar Mateen killed 49 people at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, the FBI had investigated him twice as a possible security threat. And with the perceived growing threat of right-wing domestic extremism, we're beginning to see the FBI use stings more often in cases involving potentially violent domestic extremists. Recently, the FBI targeted a group of right-wing extremists in Michigan with a sting involving a ludicrous plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The FBI encouraged the men's anger and extremism.
If this whole thing, starts to happen, I'm telling you what, dude, I'm taking out as many of those motherfuckers as I can. Every single one, dude.
Keep moving. But with the use of a dozen informants, the FBI appeared to make the entire plot possible. When the FBI announced arrests in the case in October 2020, the supposed plot led the evening news.
Now, in an indictment that reads like a movie script, prosecutors say members of a militia group met in secret underground room and used encrypted communications to hatch their plans.
The reason that the indictment read like a movie script was, of course, because it pretty much was one. It was packaged and produced by the FBI to make it appear like a terrorist plot was foiled, just like it's been done hundreds of times before in the 2 decades since 9/11. But as with stings involving so-called international terrorists, there are questions about how much such stings stop actual right-wing extremist violence. Just a few months after the FBI arrested those Michigan men, a violent mob stormed the US Capitol. The FBI was caught flat-footed, apparently unaware that extremist groups like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys were planning for such violence. That's just more proof that these stings don't stop the actual threats. They just catch the unsuspecting people the FBI can set up as terrorists.